Jettel, JeanJean, JCavallini, which technique book should you buy? G'day and welcome back to the A to Z of Clarinet. My name is Philip and we have reached J, which stands for, well, not a lot, it turns out. So I've assembled my three favourite clarinet composers of technique books, all beginning with the letter J. Now, of course, let's not forget everyone's favourite Austrian singer-songwriter clarinetist, Jewel. But anyway, there are countless technique books out there for clarinet, and it's difficult to know which one to buy. So today, I'm going to tell you. You should buy all of them. Take care, and I'll see you soon. But really, if we're serious about making beautiful music, we should have a technique to suit it. Now, before we dive in, let me get one thing very clear. Technique is a tool, not a goal. You don't have technique, you use technique. Now, learning all our scales and arpeggios, now that's one thing, but actually using that technique to create beautiful music is another thing entirely. So today I want to talk a bit about my three favourite technique books and how we can use them to make beautiful music, rather than just learning technique. So first up, we have The Clarinet School by Rudolph Jettel. Now, Rudolph Jettel was actually my great-grand teacher. I studied with Knut Lauritsen, Knut Lauritsen studied with Peter Schmiedel, and Peter Schmiedel studied with Rudolph Jettel. He was born in 1903 and lived until 1981. A really great year, if you ask me. Jettel was a clarinet player, a teacher, a composer, but he was also an instrument maker. He made clarinets, so he probably had some pretty good insights into how they should work technically. And Jettel was probably most famous for being the principal clarinet of the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, his school for clarinet, or method for clarinet, is basically a scale book. Now, I say it's basically a scale book. It is a scale book on steroids. It contains all kinds of permutations of major scales, minor scales, even whole tone scales, scales in various intervals and over the complete range of the instrument. Next up, we have Paul JeanJean, a French clarinetist born in 1874 and died in 1928. Now, JeanJean studied with the infamous Cyril Rosé, pardon my pronunciation, yes, that Rosé, and JeanJean studied alongside some, no-name Frenchies like Louis Cahuzac and Henri Selma. JeanJean was the principal clarinet of the Monte Carlo Opera and was also a clarinet teacher at the Paris Conservatoire, where he wrote numerous competition pieces and technique books for the students there. Now, among his many publications is the Vade Mecum. This is not a scale book at all. This is a set of 6 specific exercises that isolate and train individual techniques on the clarinet. It isolates the left hand from the right hand. There's an exercise on trills, on flutter tonguing and staccato, and an absolutely beautiful but brutal exercise on stamina of the embouchure. Now, the bulk of the exercises in this book don't concentrate on technique in a harmonic sense, so not major scales, minor scales, and arpeggios, but rather different figurations using fingers in unusual and unfamiliar combinations. And finally, we have Ernesto Cavallini, who lived from 1807 to 1874. Cavallini was an Italian virtuoso clarinetist. Now, he was, he died the year JeanJean was born, so we're talking another generation in the past. In fact, the instrument that Cavallini played on was a 6-key boxwood clarinet. So Cavallini was actually principal clarinetist of La Scala Opera House in Milan. And this is in the second half of the 19th century. So he definitely would have performed and probably even premiered countless operas by the likes of Rossini and Verdi. Now, I never met the guy, but I could imagine his playing must have completely embodied and personified the bel canto style. That is, clear text, emotional phrasing, and acrobatic flourishes. I can't imagine how he would have done that on a 6-key clarinet. His Caprices for clarinet, and there are several volumes of them depending on which edition you buy, they're challenging and they're really quite approachable for intermediate to advanced players. A lot of the Caprices in the series are in a theme and variations form or a da capo aria form, which you might imagine being an opera clarinetist. They have memorable, singable melodies and some really tricky technical work along with some fantastic articulation so that you can really work on the coordination between the tongue and the fingers. Okay, so there's your quick overview of those 3 clarinet players and some of the books that they wrote. Now go out and buy them. But now I want to talk a little bit more about what you want to get out of these books. Now, there's a reason I talked about 3 different clarinetists from 3 different countries. We had an Austrian, a Frenchman, and an Italian, and they all walked into a bar, and one of them said, "What is this, a joke?" Cavallini played operas. He played Italian operas. I'm sure that the bulk of his job was playing Italian operas. So when he wrote a series of exercises for his students or for the general public, it was based around the idea of playing Italian operas. Now, without going all the way back to the Protestant Reformation and a music history lesson, although I'm happy to talk about history, let me know in the comments if you want me to. But as the different national styles of music started to diverge around the 15th century, language played a huge part. The Italian language, being closely related to the original Latin language of, the Western art music tradition, is a consonant-driven language that has long, beautiful vowels that are absolutely perfect for melismas. What's a melisma? That's when you have lots of different notes on one syllable. Basically, the entire bel canto singing tradition is built around the idea of melismas. So for an Italian clarinetists writing method books or studies for Italian clarinetists, there's going to be a lot of technical work that will set you up well to play music that is highly melismatic, very florid, but with a speech-like articulation that is fairly, regular and kind of fast-moving. Now, talking about Rudolph Jettel, he was a Viennese clarinetist. So what kind of music would he likely play on a day-to-day basis and prepare his students for? Well, it would be the German masters. Mozart, Brahms, Wagner, Richard Strauss, Mahler, even on into Schoenberg. Now, going back to the language idea, the hard-edged and guttural consonants of the German language don't lend it to flowing melismas. German music is very different because the language is very different. So think about Mozart, think about Brahms, even think about Schoenberg. The music is highly melodic. Melody is everything, but the melodies tend to be very syllabic. Therefore, when it comes to learning melodies, we learn melodies not so much with only a beauty of tone in our mind. We want to think about it in terms of harmony and how that harmony might be adventurous. Take, for example, Richard Strauss. If you've ever played anything by Strauss, one of the tone poems or even the operas if you've been lucky enough, yes, we have melodies, and the melodies are beautiful, but the harmonies beneath them can be absolutely wild. So having a technique that lends itself to melody, but with a really solid harmonic foundation, is of the utmost importance. Now that brings us to Paul JeanJean, who was French. Now the French language is another animal entirely. Where the German language is very consonant-driven and syllabic, the French language is long and flowing with luxurious vowels and diphthongs and blurry-edged consonants that just scream for a completely different kind of melodic treatment. Now, let's not get carried away talking about melody just yet. Now, Paul JeanJean lived around the same time as Claude Debussy. Debussy, the quintessential French composer, embodied so much of the French language in his music. I'm certain that JeanJean was no stranger at all to Debussy's music. In fact, he probably loved it. Now, we love Debussy because his music is beautiful. Of course, for us, we have the Premier Rhapsody, the incredible clarinet parts in the orchestral repertoire, and music like, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun and all that kind of stuff. Now, let's not forget the incredible contribution that Debussy made to French music, and that was the elevation of timbre, that is the sounds of notes, to an expressive element equal to that of rhythm, harmony, and melody. So in Debussy's music, and a lot of French music since Debussy, the sounds of the notes, the sounds of the chords are much more important to the expression of the music than the harmony or the function of that harmony. Now, what does that tell you about the kind of technique that you should employ when you're playing it? Okay, so for German music, it's quite easy. We want firm, solid syllables in our playing. We want a kind of firmness in our fingers and a legato that really gives us that singing quality. In Italian music, like Cavallini, we want to sing as well, but it's much more about the enunciation of those words and those occasional melismas that we get where we show off our musicality. Florid runs and spectacular scales and arpeggios. But in French music, we want a kind of lightness. We want a kind of technique that steers away from major and minor scales to unfamiliar and perhaps even uncomfortable finger combinations and combinations of notes that don't sound like major or minor scales, but in combination with everything else around them sound light, refreshing, and full of color. So in those 3 books, the Cavallini, the Jettel, and the JeanJean, we have 3 completely different approaches to making music through 3 different languages, and then 3 completely different ways of approaching how we use our fingers on our clarinet. And that's just our fingers. Then we can start talking about the sound that we make. Now, of course, this is a generalization. Music is music, and we should be thinking about all of these things no matter what the piece is that we're approaching. I'm not suggesting that every time you play a French piece, you should think of light fingers and all the different colors that you can make. Actually, no, I am actually saying that. But I'm not saying that when you play German music, it's only about legato. And when you play Italian music, it's only about vocal quality. But the languages are different. The playing styles, therefore, are different because the music is different. If we acknowledge that, we open the door to thinking more deeply about the physical connection to our instrument. And to me, that's what it's all about. Okay, that's it. I think I've rambled enough about music. Learn your scales, learn a variety of different approaches to technique, and play beautiful music with the technique. Thanks for joining me today. Sorry I haven't seen you in a little while. It's the absolute busiest time of year at the moment with all the graduations and the exams and things like that. It's also the absolute hottest part of the year as well. I live here in Wajak Noongar Buja, and I tell you, it's like 100 degrees outside at the moment. My reeds are angry. But yes, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you like nerding out about technique and about music history and theory just as much as I do. If you do, let me know in the comments. What else would you like me to talk about? I'll see you next time for K. Seriously, K. J was hard, K. And I look forward to seeing you then. Take care and I'll see you soon. Oh, and use technique, don't just learn it.